duffel bag and carried me under his arms to the yard behind our house. Come here, kid, I gotta show you this. A peculiar mix of aftershave and what I now recognize as pot waved off his shirt. He sat me down in a patch of grass and pointed out beyond our yard toward the hills in the distance. Our house set among identical multicolored houses of our neighborhood. The Pacific in one direction, hills of city in the others. What? I asked, my 5-year-old mind not seeing whatever it was he saw. There, look, he said, an insistence in his voice. I squinted and scrunched my face and shook my head no. I saw the same scene that I always saw when I played in the yard. Hills rising in the distance beyond, pointed rooftops, the worn chipped wooden fence separating our property from our neighbors, plastic lawn furniture, small trees and potted plants, a small fire pit in the center of the yard. He sighed, resigned, glanced over at me. You really don't see it, do you? What am I looking for? You aren't looking for anything. That's the point, kid. Everyone's always looking for something when all they gotta do is open their eyes. He gazed in the distance at nothing in particular and sat like that for a long while. I'm hungry, I said after some time passed. He didn't respond, so I got up and wandered back to the house. Hours later, when the sun began to set, I went back to the spot where I left him. He was still there, gazing out over the yard toward the distant hills, eyes glazed over. He hadn't moved at all, still in the dirt, his faded jeans, tattered t-shirt with the Doors logo printed on the front, drab green bandana around his neck, his legs crossed, shoulders slightly slumped, hands limp in his lap. His dark, shaggy hair almost reached his shoulders back then, before it all started to fall out. 4 months after opening the box, I was on the other side of the world where more memories trickled through and the questions surfaced. Who was this man who raised my father, who took me to candy stores and bookshops as a child, who played rock and roll records and taught me how to dance? How well do we really know those who are closest to us, who live with us and tuck us in at night and read us bedtime stories? Who was Xavier Miller? There were clues in every conversation, in every action, clues that, at the time, we saw through the lens of a man suffering from trauma. Personality quirks we brushed off and blamed on his time in the war. On more than one occasion late at night, I'd awake at dirt, startled, and tiptoe to my window and peer through the curtains. There he'd be in the yard, on his belly, crying with hysteria, beating the ground, his words muffled with sobs. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. His strange behavior, once sad, now ominous and haunting. During dinner sometimes, he'd stop eating and stare off into the air, occasionally nodding his head as though he were listening to the whispers of apparitions. Dad, my father would say, finish your dinner. He'd point with his fork to my grandfather's messy plate. Then he turned to me. Ari, your shirt has a stain on it. My father's keen eye for detail, not unlike my grandfather's, but nothing like either. Dave, would you leave that poor kid alone? Zave's typical response to anything involving me. It was how the arguments always started, back when there were still arguments, before my dad gave up and would just leave